For more than 4 decades, the United States and Iran have been locked in one of the world's most complicated geopolitical rivalries. Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the two nations have viewed each other with deep suspicion. The United States accused Iran of supporting militant groups across the Middle East and pursuing nuclear weapons capabilities, while Iran accused Washington of attempting to undermine its government through sanctions, military pressure, and regional interference. Over the years, tensions repeatedly rose and fell. But in 2026, the relationship exploded into one of the most dangerous conflicts the region had seen in decades. The road to war was paved by years of disagreements over Iran's nuclear program, regional influence, missile capabilities, and support for armed groups across the Middle East. As diplomatic efforts stalled, military tensions escalated. The situation finally erupted when coordinated military operations involving the United States and Israel targeted Iranian facilities. Iran responded with missile attacks, drone strikes, and actions that disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy choke points on the planet. Almost immediately, global markets reacted. Oil prices surged, shipping costs increased, and fears grew that the conflict could spread across the Middle East and trigger a worldwide economic crisis. As the conflict dragged on, both sides discovered that victory would come at an enormous cost. The United States was spending billions of dollars on military operations and faced growing domestic concerns about another prolonged conflict. Iran, meanwhile, was dealing with severe economic damage, infrastructure losses, and the continued pressure of international sanctions. Energy markets remained unstable, and countries around the world began pushing for a diplomatic solution before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Behind the scenes, a number of countries quietly worked to bring both sides to the negotiating table. Pakistan played a major mediation role, while Qatar, Oman, Switzerland, and several Gulf nations facilitated communication channels. These efforts eventually produced a framework agreement designed to stop the fighting and create a pathway toward a more comprehensive settlement. What emerged was not a permanent peace treaty, but rather a memorandum of understanding, essentially a roadmap intended to prevent further escalation while negotiators worked on the most difficult issues. The deal contains several important provisions. First, both sides agreed to a ceasefire period that would halt major military operations. Second, Iran agreed to facilitate the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, restoring one of the world's most critical shipping routes and helping stabilize global energy markets. Third, both sides committed to future negotiations focused on Iran's nuclear program, maritime security, sanctions, and regional stability. The agreement also creates a framework for discussing economic incentives that could encourage long-term compliance. One of the most controversial parts of the agreement involves money. Social media and some political commentators claimed that the United States agreed to hand Iran hundreds of billions of dollars to stop the war. However, the reality appears more complicated. Current reports indicate that negotiators discussed a potential $300 billion reconstruction and development fund that would support investment in Iran's economy. According to available information, this would not be a direct payment from the US government. Instead, it would be financed by private investors and companies from multiple regions, including Gulf states and other international partners. The fund would only become fully available if Iran complies with the conditions of the agreement, particularly regarding nuclear inspections and future commitments. US officials have repeatedly denied that American taxpayers are giving Iran a $300 billion payout. There are also conflicting reports about frozen Iranian assets. Some Iranian media outlets suggested that billions of dollars in frozen funds could eventually be released, while US officials have disputed specific figures being circulated publicly. What appears more likely is that sanctions relief and access to frozen assets could be part of future negotiations if Iran fulfills its obligations under the agreement. At this stage, however, the exact financial arrangements remain unresolved. For Washington, the deal offers several important benefits. It reduces the immediate risk of a wider regional war, helps restore stability to global energy markets, reopens the Strait of Hormuz, and creates an opportunity to address concerns about Iran's nuclear activities through negotiations rather than military action. American leaders can present the agreement as a diplomatic achievement that prevented a much larger conflict while protecting global economic interests. For Iran, the agreement provides a chance to reduce military pressure, begin discussions about sanctions relief, attract future investment, and secure economic breathing room after months of conflict. Iranian leaders can argue that they resisted military pressure and compelled the United States to negotiate rather than impose unconditional demands. However, many hardliners inside Iran remain deeply skeptical and believe the agreement gives away too much leverage without providing enough guarantees. Israel's reaction has been far more cautious. Israeli leaders continue to view Iran as their most significant long-term security threat. From Israel's perspective, the core issue is not whether the fighting pauses temporarily, but whether Iran's nuclear ambitions are genuinely restricted. Many Israeli officials worry that a ceasefire could simply give Iran additional time to regroup. This is one reason why Israel has remained skeptical of the agreement and continues to maintain pressure on Iranian-backed groups in the region. China, meanwhile, strongly supports de-escalation. As one of the world's largest energy consumers, China has a direct interest in keeping Middle Eastern oil flowing smoothly through international shipping lanes. A prolonged conflict threatens global trade, energy security, and economic growth. Beijing therefore sees diplomacy and stability as the preferred outcome. Russia's position is more nuanced. Moscow has maintained close relations with Tehran and criticized Western military actions. However, Russia has also avoided direct involvement in the conflict. While the Kremlin benefits when American attention is diverted away from other geopolitical theaters, it also has little interest in seeing the Middle East descend into complete chaos. For Russia, a managed peace that preserves its influence in the region is preferable to an uncontrollable regional war. Despite the optimism surrounding the agreement, significant risks remain. The toughest issues have not yet been solved. Negotiators still need to address uranium enrichment levels, nuclear inspections, sanctions, ballistic missile concerns, regional proxy groups, and long-term security guarantees. Even a single major incident could derail the entire process. The future of the agreement may ultimately depend on whether both sides can build enough trust to move from a temporary ceasefire toward a comprehensive settlement. So, does this deal mean the war is over? The honest answer is that nobody knows yet. What exists today is not a permanent peace treaty, but a fragile framework designed to stop the fighting and buy time for diplomacy. It represents an opportunity rather than a guarantee. If future negotiations succeed, historians may look back on this moment as the beginning of a new chapter in US-Iran relations. If they fail, the current ceasefire may simply become a pause before another confrontation. What is clear is that the rivalry between the United States and Iran is unlikely to disappear. The history, mistrust, and competing interests run too deep. The real question is whether that rivalry can be managed through diplomacy and competition rather than missiles and war. The next 60 days may undermine not only the future of US Iran relations but also the future stability of the entire Middle East.